Chapter 3: The Oppression of Vulnerable Populations. Medieval Ideas of Women. In medieval times, the husband was the superior member of the family and the wife and children were subordinate. Women were expected to be obedient and to only work on household duties. Women were assumed to be weaker vessels than men, physically, morally, and intellectually. Colonial hierarchy. In the colonies, the hierarchy was very similar to the social hierarchy in England. The Declaration of Independence made no mention of women, and they had no voting rights. Women could own property or sign contracts when they were widowed or unmarried. If a marriage was dissolved, children were the husband's legal property. Husbands who died before their wives left all the land and estate to their children. Women who could not support themselves were forced into poorhouses. No birth control existed, and many women died in childbirth. Oppression of Native Americans. Columbus placed natives in the position of feudal serfs. Natives were allowed to keep their property but had to give all produce to the conquerors. Many natives died from exposure to European diseases. Religious influence. Europeans divided people into groups of either Christians or heathens. Heathens were allowed to be placed into servitude once they had rejected Christianity. Europeans also interpreted the difference in skin color as meaning that the natives were heathen. Geographic division of natives. Tribes occupied coastal areas from New England to Florida. There were also inland tribes in the Appalachian Mountains. Settlers thought that coastal tribes could be converted to Christianity and teach them about native crops. Inland tribes resisted colonists until the 18th century because of their location. Oppression of slaves. Europeans wanted slaves to work sugar and tobacco crops, and so many natives had died that they couldn't use them. They decided to use Africans as they had a large population and were more resistant to disease. Advantages of slaves. Slaves were kept for life rather than for a few years like indentured servants. Slaves were also not released, so there was no accommodating them afterwards. They could also be disciplined without court involvement. Most slaves were brought to the U.S. after 1676. Working and social conditions were usually degrading. Southern whites defined slaves and natives as non-persons, so they felt no guilt. Conflicts between the North and South over slavery led to a series of compromises. Discrimination against poor whites. The British class system still existed in colonial America. Some white settlers did not own land, were alcoholics, had disabilities, or had crops that were ruined by weather. This poor white population was seen as disposable by the rest of society.